Johnny Carson was the biggest star in America. Movie stars, rock stars, I don't think anybody was bigger than Johnny because he was on night after night after night.
Picture this, Malibu, California, January 2005. Inside a pristine beach house overlooking the Pacific, America's most beloved late-night host sits in his favorite chair, his breathing labored from decades of cigarettes. Johnny Carson, the man who made 50 million people laugh every night for 30 years.
How does the wolf go?
Is dying. His wife Alexis sits beside him as he struggles to speak. Then suddenly, in one of his final lucid moments, he whispers 5 words that will haunt her forever. I'm tired of the lies. What lies? What had Johnny Carson been hiding for so long that even facing death, the weight of deception was crushing him? For 79 years, Johnny Carson had perfected the art of being exactly what America needed him to be. Charming, composed, seemingly effortless. But tonight, we're revealing the shocking truth behind those final words. The devastating family tragedy that broke him. The isolation that consumed his final years. And the heartbreaking confession to his wife that finally explained why America's king of comedy died so utterly alone. This isn't just the story of Johnny Carson's death. It's the revelation of what killed his spirit long before emphysema claimed his lungs. These revelations come from his closest friend, Howard Smith's never-before-released memoir, sealed family interviews, and the private testimony of his 4th wife, Alexis, who witnessed his final moments. For the first time, we're hearing the real Johnny Carson, not the polished performer, but the broken man behind the curtain who spent his last years carrying secrets too heavy for any human soul to bear. The Last Supper, when Johnny knew he was dying. January 7, 2005. A chance encounter at a Malibu pharmacy that would become legendary among Carson's inner circle. Howard Smith, Johnny's tennis partner and closest friend for 20 years, happened to be picking up prescriptions when he spotted the frail figure of America's former king of late night. "What are you doing tonight?" Carson asked, his voice raspy from the emphysema ravaging his lungs. "Nothing," Smith replied, not knowing he was about to witness something extraordinary. "Why don't we go get dinner tonight?" Carson suggested. His wife Alexis was visiting family in Pittsburgh, leaving Johnny alone with his thoughts and his secrets. What happened next would be described by Smith as the Last Supper, the longest dinner in their 20-year friendship, and the most revealing glimpse into Carson's tortured soul. They arrived at the restaurant as the first customers and left as the last. For over 4 hours, Johnny Carson transformed into someone Smith had never seen before. He was hilarious, animated, telling story after story about celebrities, behind-the-scenes moments, and decades of Tonight Show memories. But there was something desperate about his performance, something that felt like a goodbye. "John was the funniest I've ever seen him," Smith would later recall. He went on and on, told stories about different people that he had on the show. We just laughed so hard, our stomachs were sore from laughing. Every time Smith tried to end the evening, "I got to go to bed," Carson would plead. "Oh no, Howard, I want to tell you this other story." It was as if he couldn't bear to let the night end, couldn't face returning to his empty house with only his failing lungs and crushing thoughts for company. Then came the moment that would haunt Smith forever. As Carson drove them home, he did something completely out of character. He got out of the car, walked around, and gave both Smith and his wife Jane a kiss and a hug. Then he tells us, "I love you," Smith remembered, fighting back tears years later. John was not standoffish, but I'd never seen him do anything like that. Looking back, Smith realized the truth. I think he knew he was dying, but didn't want us to worry. He wanted to give us the best of himself before he went. 16 days later, Johnny Carson was dead. The tragedy that broke America's funny men. To understand Johnny's final confession, we must return to June 21st, 1991, the day that shattered Johnny Carson's carefully constructed world and began his descent into isolation. Richard Rick Carson, Johnny's 39-year-old son, was driving along California's scenic Highway 1 near Cayucos, pursuing his passion for landscape photography. The winding coastal road was a favorite among artists and photographers, offering breathtaking views of the Pacific Ocean. Rick had stopped to capture images of the rugged coastline when tragedy struck. His 1991 Nissan Pathfinder went over the edge of Cayucos Drive, plunging 125 feet down a steep embankment. The vehicle rolled multiple times before landing upside down in a concrete-lined culvert. Rick, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was thrown from the car and died instantly from severe internal chest injuries. A local resident who had seen Rick driving around earlier that day discovered the accident scene within minutes. He climbed down the treacherous incline, felt for a pulse, then rushed home to call authorities. Photography equipment was scattered above the crash site, heartbreaking evidence that Rick had died doing what he loved. The news devastated Johnny Carson in ways the public would never fully understand. For years, Carson had struggled with the balance between his demanding career and his role as a father. His first marriage to Joan Wolcott had ended in 1963, partly due to the pressures of his rising fame. The guilt of being an absent father had haunted him through 3 more marriages. That sense of failure overcomes you, Carson had confided to Barbara Walters years earlier. That you have been less than you should have as a husband or father. Those guilt feelings can be overwhelming at times, especially if the children are young. Now Rick was gone, and there would never be a chance to make things right. When Carson returned to The Tonight Show after taking 4 weeks off to grieve, he did something unprecedented. He opened his heart to America. Fighting back tears, he showed a photograph of Rick and spoke words that revealed his crushing pain. When Rick was around, you wanted to smile. He had a laugh that was contagious as could be. He tried so darn hard to please. But the most devastating revelation came in private conversations with family members. According to biographer Mike Thomas, Johnny confessed his deepest regret. He lamented the fact that he hadn't been a better father. Carson's guilt was compounded by a cruel irony. Just weeks before Rick's death, NBC had announced that Jay Leno would succeed Johnny as host of The Tonight Show. Carson was finally ready to step back from the demanding schedule that had consumed his life for 30 years. He was ready to be present for his family. But for Rick, it was too late. The Great Retreat, why Johnny vanished from America. Following Rick's death, Johnny Carson began what friends would later describe as the Great Retreat. The man who had been America's nightly companion for 3 decades systematically cut himself off from the world. After his final Tonight Show taping on May 22, 1992, Carson made a decision that shocked Hollywood. He would not return to television, ever. Despite offers worth tens of millions of dollars, despite pleas from networks and fans, Johnny Carson chose to disappear. By the time he retired from The Tonight Show in 1992,
the Johnny Carson era is over. Further west, the end is near. Carson bid his TV audience goodbye Friday after almost 30 years as host of The Tonight Show.
he was already living a life of limited connection, observed those close to him. His family relationships had frayed, and there were few people left who really knew him well. Carson's Malibu home became his fortress. He turned down NBC's 75th anniversary celebration. He refused countless interview requests. He gave no farewell tours, made no public appearances. To the outside world, his silence looked like grace and dignity. But to those who knew him, it was something else entirely. A man running from his own pain. The isolation deepened when Carson was diagnosed with emphysema in 2002. The disease, caused by his decades-long cigarette habit, was slowly destroying his lungs. He had smoked 4 packs of Pall Mall cigarettes a day during his Tonight Show years, often lighting up on camera until smoking on television fell out of favor. "These things are killing me," Carson had repeatedly said as early as the mid-1970s, but he couldn't quit. Now the prediction was coming true. His brother Dick Carson would later reveal that during their final conversation, Johnny kept repeating, Those damn cigarettes. But by then, the damage was irreversible. As his breathing became more labored, Carson's world grew even smaller. Howard Smith noticed the change during their tennis matches. In our 20 years of playing tennis together, I knew the sound of John's laugh, his forehand grunts, and his labored breathing. Toward the end, his breathing became increasingly difficult. We started playing less often. Eventually, even tennis became impossible. One day he said, Howard, I don't think I can play anymore. I think I ran out of gas, but let's do this. On Saturdays and Sundays, you come over to my house, I'll make you coffee, and we'll just sit around, talk about life. But even these quiet conversations couldn't fill the void in Carson's soul. He had spent 30 years making millions of people laugh while slowly dying inside. Now, facing his own mortality, the weight of that performance was becoming unbearable. The performance that never ended. To understand Johnny's final confession, we must grasp the exhausting reality of his public persona. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson wasn't just a talk show host. He was America's therapist, confidant, and nightlight. He guided the nation through Vietnam, Watergate, disco, and countless other cultural moments, always with the same reassuring presence. But this role came at a devastating personal cost. Johnny Carson, the man, was very different from Johnny, the performer. Friends described him as shy, reserved, and emotionally guarded. The cheerful, quick-witted host who charmed millions every night was, in many ways, an elaborate construction. He was always a bit emotionally separated, explained biographer Mike Thomas. His mother could be domineering, emotionally withholding, and hard to please. That breeds insecurity in a child. This emotional distance served Carson well professionally, but destroyed his personal relationships. He went through 4 marriages, struggling to connect with wives who often felt they were living with a stranger. Even his children found their father difficult to reach, always performing rather than simply being present. The pressure of maintaining this persona 24/7 was crushing. Carson couldn't go anywhere without being Johnny. He couldn't have a bad day, couldn't show weakness, couldn't be human in the messy, complicated way that most people are allowed to be. Even after retirement, the expectation followed him. Fans, friends, and family still expected glimpses of the charming entertainer they remembered from television. By 2005, as emphysema ravaged his body and depression consumed his spirit, Carson was exhausted from the performance. The mask he had worn for so long had become too heavy to bear. In his final days, surrounded by tubes and struggling for each breath, the weight of decades of pretense was finally crushing him. The final confession. In one of Johnny Carson's final lucid conversations, as death crept closer and the spotlights had long since gone cold, he turned to his wife Alexis and spoke the words that would define his last moments on Earth. "I'm tired of the lies." It wasn't shouted. There was no rage in it, just a quiet fatigue that settled deep in the room like fog rolling in from the Pacific outside their Malibu home. The words caught Alexis off guard, not because of what he said, but because of how much weight was behind them. These weren't the last words of a man confessing to scandal or admitting guilt about some hidden transgression. They were the release of someone who had carried the weight of an image for far too long. For decades, Carson had been America's nightlight, charming, composed, seemingly effortless. But behind that polished exterior was a man who had curated everything, controlled every public moment, manufactured every glimpse the world was allowed to see. The public saw Johnny. Very few ever met John. By the time of his final hours, that separation had grown exhausting. Friends and family close enough to witness those final days said he wasn't angry about his approaching death. He was simply done. Done with the performance. Done pretending he was still the man America remembered from television. Done carrying the crushing weight of being what everyone needed him to be. Even after retirement, Carson had worked hard to maintain distance from the public. No comeback tours, no tell-all interviews, no unguarded public moments. To the outside world, his silence looked like grace and dignity. But to those closest to him, it may have also been one final performance, the role of the dignified retiree who had stepped gracefully away from the spotlight. I'm tired of the lies wasn't about secrets or scandals hidden in closets. It was about identity. It was about the emotional toll of decades spent being what people needed him to be. Funny, sharp, cool under pressure, even as life stripped away his ability to maintain that facade. The emphysema had stolen his voice, the depression had drained his spirit, and the isolation had left him hollow. In that context, his final words felt less like a dramatic declaration and more like a quiet surrender to truth. After 79 years of being Johnny Carson, the performer, the icon, the carefully constructed personality, he was finally allowing himself to simply be John, a tired old man facing death without his mask. And perhaps that's why the moment resonates so deeply. It wasn't televised. It wasn't scripted. It was devastatingly human and honest. For anyone who has ever worn a mask for too long, carried a performance past its expiration date, or felt crushed by the weight of others' expectations, Johnny's final confession cuts straight to the bone, the lonely death of America's companion. Johnny Carson died on January 23, 2005 at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The cause was respiratory failure due to emphysema. He was 79 years old. True to his wishes, there was no public funeral, no memorial service, no gathering of celebrities to honor his memory. His family released a brief statement confirming his passing, and that was it. Carson had planned it this way. He didn't want a big send-off or a public display. He had spent his final years in private and wanted to leave the world the same way. The contrast was stark and heartbreaking. This was a man who had been America's most beloved companion for 30 years, who had been invited into millions of homes every night, who had comforted the nation through countless tragedies and celebrations. Yet he died essentially alone, surrounded by only a handful of people who truly knew him. Many of Carson's friends and colleagues were saddened by how little they knew about his final years. Some learned about his death from news reports. Others had already lost contact with him completely, victims of his systematic retreat from human connection. The irony was devastating. America's greatest conversationalist had chosen silence. The man who had made millions laugh had died in solitude. The host who had welcomed thousands of guests had shut his door to nearly everyone. Carson's body was cremated, and the ashes were given to his wife, Alexis. Even in death, there would be no public grave for fans to visit, no monument to mark the passing of television's greatest star. Johnny Carson had achieved what he'd sought in his final years, complete privacy. But the price was a loneliness so profound that even his final confession to his wife was about the exhaustion of pretending to be someone else. The secrets Johnny took to his grave. Despite his final confession about being tired of the lies, Johnny Carson took many secrets with him to the grave. The full extent of his pain, his regrets, and his private thoughts died with him in that Los Angeles hospital room. What we know comes in fragments, glimpses shared by friends like Howard Smith, confessions made to wives during vulnerable moments, and the occasional crack in his carefully maintained facade. But Carson was a master of control, even in his final years. Much of his inner life remained hidden, even from those closest to him. His relationship with his surviving sons, Chris and Corey, remained complicated until the end. Both had struggled with having a famous father who was emotionally distant. Carson's guilt about his failures as a parent haunted him, but he never found a way to fully bridge the gap with his children. His first wife, Joan Wolcott, who had been with him during his rise to fame, reportedly never got over their divorce. His second wife, Joanne Copeland, remained the woman he privately considered the love of his life, even while married to Alexis. The weight of these failed relationships, these roads not taken, pressed down on him throughout his final years. There were also the professional regrets, opportunities missed, risks not taken, creative ambitions left unfulfilled. Carson had dreamed of being more than a talk show host, but his success in that role became a golden prison that defined him for life. Most tragically, there were the words never spoken to his son, Rick, the conversations they never had, the relationship they never built, the love that was always present but never properly expressed. Carson carried that guilt until his final breath, knowing that death had stolen any chance for redemption. The price of being America's therapist. For 30 years, Johnny Carson served as America's unofficial therapist. Every night, he helped the nation process its anxieties, its tragedies, its moments of joy and confusion. He was the steady presence who made sense of the chaos, who found humor in the darkness, who reassured millions that everything would be okay. But who was Johnny Carson's therapist? Who helped him process his own pain, his own confusion, his own moments of despair? The answer appears to be no one. Carson carried the weight of his own problems in isolation, compounding his suffering by refusing to seek help or open up to others. The role of national comforter is an impossible burden for any individual to bear. Carson absorbed the country's pain night after night, year after year, while simultaneously suppressing his own emotional needs. The cost was enormous: failed marriages, distant relationships with his children, and ultimately a retreat into isolation so complete that he died essentially alone. His final confession, "I'm tired of the lies," can be understood as the cry of a man who had given everything to others while denying himself the basic human need for authentic connection. He had been America's friend for 3 decades, but America, for all its love and admiration, could never be his friend in return. Today, Johnny Carson is remembered as television's greatest talk show host, a master entertainer who defined late-night television for generations. His influence on comedy and broadcasting cannot be overstated. He launched countless careers, created moments of pure magic, and brought joy to millions of viewers. But perhaps his most important legacy is a cautionary tale about the price of fame and the danger of losing oneself in public persona. Carson's story reveals the dark side of celebrity, the isolation, the pressure to constantly perform, the inability to form genuine human connections when everyone sees you as a character rather than a person. His final confession serves as a reminder that behind every public figure is a human being with the same needs for love, acceptance, and authenticity that we all share. Carson's tragedy was that he forgot this truth, or perhaps never learned it, and spent his final years paying the ultimate price for his extraordinary success. The man who made America laugh died with a broken heart, tired of the lies that had defined his life. In the end, Johnny Carson's greatest performance may have been convincing the world that he was okay, when in reality, he was slowly dying inside, suffocated by the weight of being everything to everyone except himself. What other Hollywood secrets do you think are still hidden behind the masks of our greatest entertainers? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Vintage Vault for more shocking revelations from Hollywood's hidden history. Next week, we're revealing Loretta Young's devastating final confession about Clark Gable, the secret that shocked Hollywood, and finally explained the daughter she claimed was adopted. You won't want to miss it.